In 2017, China supplied 21.6% of everything America imported. Mexico supplied 13.4%. Today those numbers have almost flipped. Mexico is now America's single largest source of imports, ahead of China, ahead of Canada, ahead of everyone. This isn't a slow drift. It's one of the fastest supply chain reversals in modern trade history, and it's happening right on America's doorstep. This is macro signal. Let's decode it. Here's the headline number. By 2024, Mexico's share of U.S. imports climbed to 15.8%, while China's fell to 13.2%. Mexico officially overtook China as the top source of U.S. imports back in 2023, and it hasn't looked back since. Manufacturing exports from Mexico to the U.S. have grown by over $150 billion since 2021, hitting $535 billion in 2025 alone. That's not a rounding error. That's an entire supply chain physically relocating a few hundred miles south. Three numbers explain almost all of it. First, tariffs. The effective U.S. tariff rate on Chinese goods reached 33.4% by the end of 2025. Mexican goods, under the USMCA trade agreement, mostly skipped that entirely. Roughly 85% of export-oriented manufacturing in Mexico now ships to the U.S. duty-free. Second, labor. Mexican manufacturing labor runs about $4.50 an hour, against roughly $6.50 in China. Third, geography. A truck from Monterrey reaches Texas in hours. A container ship from Shenzhen takes weeks. When you tariff one option and leave the other basically untaxed, and the untaxed option is also cheaper and closer, the math makes itself. This isn't abstract. Real, recognizable companies are behind these numbers. Whirlpool now runs 3 plants in Mexico employing over 10,000 people. LG Electronics operates 4 factories across Monterrey, Reynosa, and Mexicali. Mabe, the appliance maker behind GE Profile, and Monogram products sold in America, runs 15 factories across 9 Mexican states. Bosch's BSH opened a $260 million refrigerator factory in Monterrey. Electrolux builds out of Ciudad Juarez. And it's not just appliances. Automotive is the single biggest slice of this boom, pulling in nearly half of all manufacturing investment into Mexico, with Japanese auto suppliers alone committing $18 billion to Mexican supply chains. Foreign direct investment into Mexico hit almost $41 billion in 2025, and industrial real estate in the big manufacturing hubs is essentially sold out, vacancy below 4% in Monterrey, Guadalajara, and Mexico City. But here's the part most coverage skips. This isn't a clean, guaranteed win for Mexico either. In 2025, Washington slapped a 25% tariff on Mexican imports too, under a separate national security order. Samsung responded by freezing future Mexico investment and cutting roughly 30% of its Mexican workforce. LG announced a new refrigerator line, not in Mexico, but in Tennessee. So the real story isn't Mexico beats China. It's that manufacturing is being pulled out of China specifically, and Mexico is the biggest, but not the only, and not risk-free, landing spot. Some of that flow is now nervously eyeing the U.S. itself as tariff policy keeps shifting under everyone's feet. Step back, and this is the same pattern we've tracked with Vietnam absorbing electronics manufacturing out of China. Except this version runs on cars and refrigerators instead of phones and sneakers, and it's happening on America's own border instead of across the Pacific. Both stories share the same root cause: companies and governments trying to build supply chains that don't run entirely through one country. Mexico's advantage is that it already has a decades-old free trade agreement with the U.S. baked into USMCA. That's a structural head start no amount of Vietnamese factory building can fully replicate for American-bound goods. Signal check: Mexico passed China as America's top import source in 2023, and the gap has kept widening, driven by a 33% effective tariff on China versus near-zero tariffs under USMCA, cheaper labor, and next-door geography. Real companies, Whirlpool, LG, Mabe, Bosch, an entire auto supply chain, are the ones actually making the move. But Mexico itself just got hit with a 25% US tariff in 2025, proving even the winner in this story isn't guaranteed a stable position. Supply chains aren't settling into a new normal. They're still being renegotiated, country by country, tariff order by tariff order. Macro signal decodes the world economy, country deep dives, rivalries, and the trends reshaping global trade. Subscribe for new breakdowns every week.